Over the past few years, I've been running a series of informal experiments for my wife, also known as the lady I live with, where she tries out various video games in order for me to see what they're like for someone who didn't grow up playing them. Throughout that time, she's gone from a complete non-gamer to someone with a growing knowledge of how games work, and I want to keep seeing how that knowledge grows. Now, while she has tried a wide sampling of games, she hasn't gotten all that deep into the vast majority of them. For the most part, that hasn't mattered a ton. She's been able to get a sense of what a lot of the games are like by just playing a couple of hours. But with some of the titles, I don't think she got far enough to really see what they were about. And because of that, there are a few games and genres I've wanted to see her revisit for a while now, and at the top of that list are CRPGs. In general, they offer players such a wide range of approaches for any given situation, and as my wife typically has done better with games that offer her a lot of freedom, I want to see how she does with one that provides an unparalleled amount of it. For a while, I didn't know the best way to have her revisit the genre, but then luckily for me, Larian Studios decided to create a wildly ambitious CRPG that not only has appealed to longtime fans of the genre, but also to people who never thought they would be interested in a game like it. And that, of course, is Baldur's Gate 3. I do know my wife well enough to be sure that Baldur's Gate 3 is not really her type of game, but as it's had a way of appealing to many people who would say the same thing, it's made me wonder if it might at the very least help her enjoy the genre a bit more than she did the last time she gave it a try. For the informal experiment on role-playing games, I had her play a bit of Disco Elysium and Divinity Original Sin 2, neither of which went all that well. Disco Elysium was a bit too out there and dark for her liking, and Divinity proved to be especially overwhelming. As it is a robust game with loads of intricate systems, there was so much for her to figure out in a short amount of time, and she felt bombarded by how much information there was. To her, it seemed as if every step was accompanied by a tutorial prompt, which not only annoyed her because she doesn't like getting interrupted, but also stressed her out due to how much stuff the game seemingly expected her to keep track of. Each new piece of information made things seem more complicated, and instead of her feeling as if she was gaining a stronger understanding of what the game was about, she felt as if she was only getting further away from having a grasp over it. This, of course, was not helped at all by me, who was just sitting back doing my mostly silent observer thing. With both games, she thought they were more trouble than they were worth and had no interest in continuing with them. And as that video was focused on a bunch of different types of RPGs, instead of pushing her to play more, I figured it'd be best to just move on to a different kind. But since then, I've always thought it was a bit of a shame that I didn't have her play more, because while the starts of these games give a taste of what their greater systems are like, they open up in so many interesting ways as they go on. So, to see whether or not Baldur's Gate 3 could draw her in enough to get past her issues with the genre, I decided to run another informal experiment. As I wanted to ensure that she got well beyond the tutorial, I chose not to just sit back this time as a mostly silent observer. I did my best not to lead her too much, and I generally waited a bit to see how things played out before giving guidance, but I did walk her through some of the major mechanics and reminded her of how stuff works as she went along. As there are so many ways things can go in Baldur's Gate 3, I didn't set a specific goal or endpoint for her to reach. Instead, I just let her dive into the world and hoped the current would take her somewhere interesting. So this is how it went. At this point of her gaming education, my wife has experienced a handful of character creators. Of all of them, this was easily the one she spent the most time in, and that was mostly because of how many impactful decisions it asked her to make. As a longtime D&D fan, the classic races and classes just feel like common knowledge to me, but as her exposure to D&D has mostly been hearing me yelling in bad accents from another room, she was immediately lost as there was so much information to sift through. There are 11 races, each with unique abilities and benefits, with the majority of them having sub-races to choose between with even more abilities, 13 backgrounds that offer different skill proficiencies, and 12 classes that all play very differently from each other, and within all those classes there are 46 subclasses, providing even more variety to what a character can be like. Understandably, she felt overwhelmed by the cascade of information, and found a lot of it hard to parse as she is not familiar with the game or 5th edition D&D, so reading ability descriptions didn't give a ton of insight on how stuff would actually operate in-game.
You get advantage on your next attack roll, so You have a
Well,
better
it'd be
chance
good
of
for
hitting.
me because I'm a bad player.
When most titles are teaching the player about a new ability, they have them just do that ability, but at this point she hadn't even seen what combat looked like, so without any sense of framework, it was hard for her to make decisions. There are ways to change the main character after starting, so players are not completely locked into whatever they go with in the creator, but it does still ask people to make a lot of important decisions that will have a pretty huge impact on their experience before they know how the game works at all. I kind of wonder if players like my wife who just have no idea about how this type of title works would have benefited from there being a playable section before the character creator where players do a combat or two as the origin characters in order to get a sense of what combat is like. This not only would teach the basics before asking them to build the character, but it also would show off a few different classes so they can know a bit more of what to expect. As her guide, I found it tough to succinctly explain all the options to her in a way that didn't seem confusing. Like for instance, what is the best way to differentiate a warlock, a sorcerer, and a wizard to someone who sees them as synonyms and doesn't know enough about the core mechanics of the game to have a grasp over the implications that come from their different spell slot situations.
They all sound the same.
And in some ways, it felt like this with all the classes, as a lot of them, despite feeling unique from each other, are only a step or two away from others in terms of function, so it was hard to effectively differentiate them without giving her a history lesson that would almost certainly bore her to a point of having no interest in playing at all. So my solution was to pitch the classes roughly by how focused on magic they were, which was a bit difficult to do because of how many martial classes have subclasses that allow for magic, but I think I got close enough. And then I just asked her if she'd like to be more focused on hitting stuff with a weapon or with spells. She said she wanted to be a magical character so that she could attack stuff from a distance and not always be in danger, but didn't want something too confusing. And after pointing her towards the bard and warlock, she went with the latter for one very solid reason.
Well, I like this person's outfit.
That's as good a reason as any to pick them.
Regardless of the why, the Warlock felt like a pretty great option as it has a lot of versatility in terms of melee and spell casting, and most of her abilities would be replenished from short rests, so she'd get to be close to full power for most fights without needing to spend a bunch of time going back to camp. Eldritch Blast is also just really freaking good.
Boom!
Okay.
What?
Once settled on Warlock, I went over the subclasses, evocations, spells, and cantrips she could go with, and during that, she was reminded of something about me.
So, there's one where you can be in service to the fiend.
You sound like a nerd.
Bro, I run a YouTube channel about video games. What do you mean?
You just forget sometimes.
Yeah, with all my Chad behavior. How do you forget?
I don't know. You don't usually tell me about spells and demons and things.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, isn't it?
On the spectrum of degen to normie, my wife obviously skews to the normie side of things. She doesn't have an issue with nerdier things. For instance, this entire series started because she wanted to engage with one of my interests, but most stuff that falls under the umbrella of nerd culture has just never been her go-to form of entertainment. While she's been able to latch onto some things within it since marrying me, others have not been as appealing to her, fantasy settings being a major one. For whatever reason, she finds magic and made-up worlds hard to connect to, so being inundated with so many details about spells and elven ancestries and otherworldly patrons right off the bat before getting the chance to engage with more grounded elements like characters definitely created a bit of a disconnect. To be clear, fantasy games shouldn't concern themselves with appealing to people who aren't interested in fantasy, but it was here that I realized that the more time spent focusing on the inner workings of the game's fantastical elements, the less likely she would be to enjoy playing it. I'm not sure the best way to ease someone who isn't all that into fantasy into the genre, but talking about stuff like Dissonant Whispers was definitely not it.
For that, you get Dissonant Whispers, which you cast a spell where you whisper, and it scares the fuck out of someone.
That's the dumbest thing ever.
After getting all the mechanical stuff selected, I hoped she'd have a little more interest in choosing what her character looked like, and while she definitely did, the creator left a lot to be desired. She wanted to make herself sort of as a way to feel more grounded in the world, but due to the lack of customization options, primarily in regards to the face, it was pretty much impossible to do.
Looks nothing like me.
Wanting more choices for this sort of thing has nothing to do with being an inexperienced or experienced player, but for the purposes of this experiment, it was a shame to see her get excited at the prospect of making herself, only to find that the game didn't offer enough customization for her to do that. It turned something she was interested in into a disappointment. For a game that is so focused on a custom experience, it's strange that they went with presets for the faces and not sliders. All in all, even though she felt a bit let down and in over her head because of all the information and magical nonsense presented to her, she was content enough with where her character ended up and ready to see what the game was really about. To keep things feeling as approachable as possible, she opted for the Explorer difficulty, which among other things doubles health and increases the proficiency bonus for the party, making it more likely to survive and roll well. When she finally got into the game proper, I had her test out playing with a mouse and keyboard versus a controller, and she vastly preferred the controller. Being able to move her character with the joysticks instead of pointing and clicking felt much more natural to her, and the simplified HUD made the screen feel less overloaded. Honestly, Larian did a pretty incredible job with how they incorporated controller support. For a title as complex as Baldur's Gate 3, it is a hard thing to accomplish, and while playing in this way obviously doesn't end up being as precise or efficient as playing with the mouse and keyboard, it more than gets the job done through effective uses of option wheels that cleanly contain everything that's important. One of the main downsides of this approach though is that it led to my wife favoring the first wheel that came up, only checking the others when she was really desperate for a move that could work, and this certainly limited her go-to options a fair bit. With that said, the wheel it defaults to is filled with the most important moves, so she wasn't at a huge disadvantage because of it. Anyway, once out of the pod, she immediately ran into an age-old issue for this series.
It didn't tell me anything about what to do.
What do you mean?
Like, there's no objective.
While she could intuit that she should find a way out of wherever she was as it was gross and on fire, she wanted more specific directions. She didn't really know who she was or why she was there or what her character wanted, which made her confused on the best course of action. Was she supposed to kill the people that put her on the ship? Was she supposed to destroy it? Was she supposed to just jump off of it? As she still doesn't feel all that comfortable when trying out a new game, she wanted more than just an assumption. Had she been playing on mouse and keyboard, she would have been able to scroll over the minimap to see the objective, but as she was on controller, there was no way to do that. Now, the game does normally show the objective on the screen when you get a new quest, so I thought it was a little strange that it didn't do it here. At first, I assumed it was just a choice by the developers to wait to introduce the journal until the player got a little further in, but when I was replaying the intro to capture some B-roll footage for this video, the objective to escape the Nautiloid came up right away. Presumably, this means that it not showing up for her was just a glitch that has since been patched out. Throughout the Gaming for a Non-Gamer series, she hasn't really run into all that many glitches, and even though I wouldn't say she experienced a ton of them in Baldur's Gate 3, it definitely had more than any game she's played before. Aside from this instance of her feeling a little directionless from not being told what to do, none of them had that much of an impact on her playthrough, but it did make me consider how disruptive bugs can be for inexperienced players. Obviously, glitches, unless they're really funny, are bad for everyone, but for those still learning game conventions, there's a higher chance that it will be hard for them to identify that what they're experiencing is even a glitch, causing them to learn all sorts of unintended and wrong lessons. Unfortunately, bugs are just a part of games. While some titles are cleaner than others, no game is free of them, and when it comes to one as massive and complex as Baldur's Gate 3, the reality is plenty of them will slip through the cracks. I will say, to Larian's credit, I believe all the bugs my wife ran into have been patched out since she finished playing, so it is good that they have a finger on the pulse of the issues with the game, even if it's not ideal that they're in there in the first place. Anyway, luckily for her, despite being unaware of what she should do, the Nautiloid is incredibly linear and funneled her where she needed to go. Also, after recruiting Lae'zel, she was given some explicit directions from her that helped fill in the gaps a bit. However, it did also lead to her entirely ignoring Shadowheart as Lae'zel says not to touch anything without knowing its purpose, so that was not ideal.
You can interact with a lot of this stuff.
But she told me not to.
Oh, okay. You don't have to. You don't. Then don't.
But she told me not to.
That's fine.
The feeling of being unsure on what she was supposed to do unfortunately stuck with her for the majority of the playthrough. Once at the beach, the game finally prompted her to look at the journal where she learned the primary goal of Act 1, find a cure. But this goal ended up being a bit nebulous for her liking. It is a big ask without a clear answer, and of course this mystery is intentional and something many players will find exciting to uncover, but she hoped for a more solid answer to the question of what to do and where to go. Throughout these experiments, I found that she likes certain types of freedom, mostly freedom over ways a task can be done. But when the task is as open as explore the area, she feels a bit out of the loop and worries about wasting time on things that won't work toward her goal. And this feeling wasn't really helped by the fact that every time she did chase down a lead, very little came of it, and she really was just pointed in a new direction.
I don't have a cure.
a letdown.
Only a way out.
While she did struggle with feeling comfortable in what she was supposed to be doing, the game did do a pretty good job of showing her how she was supposed to be doing things. In general, the slower pace of Baldur's Gate 3 made actions and instructions easier to follow. It also has solid tutorial prompts that didn't fully interrupt what she was in the middle of doing, but did draw enough attention where she rarely missed them entirely. On top of that, they are pretty well paced, making it so she didn't feel like she was drowning in tutorial messages in the same way she had with Divinity Original Sin 2, even though she was getting as much if not more information. Although some of them do trigger after doing a related action, which depending on if you're focused on some other task, can cause information to be easier to gloss over. As for combat, she ended up being somewhat mixed on it. At first she loved its turn-based nature, as meeting the demands of fast-paced action-oriented combat can be a lot to deal with, and often calls for more skill than she has. The game gave her time to make decisions, and she didn't have to deal with the frustration of dying over and over again for not being quick or accurate enough. However, it was still a lot to keep track of, as she not only had to control her own character, but also all of the ones who joined her party, which wasn't really something she expected to have to do. Honestly, she was still trying to get a grasp over her own character, so having to quickly figure out the abilities and strengths of 3 others that she had no part in creating made things a fair bit more stressful for her. Additionally, this meant most of her time in combat was spent taking actions as other people, leading to her barely feeling like she got to engage with the character she had spent so much time building. After a few fights, she wished that the companions either had a simplified moveset or be controlled by AI so that she could focus on her own character. Frankly, it is a bit surprising that there isn't an option to have the companions just be controlled by the computer, as the game is more than capable of simulating their moves, and in fact there are a few times where it does control them, and in one of the instances it actually created a pretty interesting encounter. When my wife came across Lae'zel captured by some tieflings, she wanted to try to work things out in a way where Lae'zel could go free but the tieflings could live as well. After a bad roll though, she was left with subpar options, and decided that her best bet was to free Lae'zel and then run away or just knock out the tieflings. At the start of the fight, the game introduced the non-lethal attack option, so she opted to use that. However, she freed Lae'zel before knocking them out, and without any hesitation, Lae'zel ran right up to the tieflings and somewhat understandably obliterated them.
Oops. Wait, now what?
This created an intriguing dynamic where Lae'zel clearly would be a useful ally for the party, but also felt like a bit of a loose cannon who might act to suit her own needs over everyone else's. This tension evaporated entirely though once she joined the party and was under my wife's complete control. To be clear, I think that for most players, controlling the entire party will be the best way to play the game, as a ton of fun comes from combining synergies and tactfully placing your characters. But I do think there are many people who would benefit from the computer taking the reins of the companions to allow them to just focus on their own character. Not only would it relieve the pressure of having so many responsibilities, but it also create neat dynamics between the player and the party, as the player will have to learn how to rely on them instead of essentially just being them, which is how my wife felt.
This feels like me if I'm controlling her.
Ultimately, she found all the things she had to keep track of during fights to be tedious. While a part of her appreciated having time to think things through, she actually found herself missing the adrenaline that comes from action-heavy titles that she often struggles with. I'm not sure exactly what the best middle ground would be, but this definitely was too far in the other direction. Part of her lack of excitement with the combat came from the fact that when she succeeded or failed, she didn't feel like she had much to do with it, because it was based on a die roll instead of her own skill, leaving her feeling even more detached from the action. Enemy turns would also go really fast, making it unclear to her what they actually did and what the long-term effects of it would be. Despite some elements that made parts of the game easier to understand, all this other stuff created a disconnect between her and the game, and unfortunately, the list of stuff that did that only kept getting bigger. A major appeal of Baldur's Gate 3 is that there are a ridiculous amount of ways to engage with any situation, allowing for a ton of player freedom, which I thought would be great for my wife as she generally does better with titles that offer flexibility. Unfortunately though, a lot of the creative ideas she came up with to get past obstacles didn't end up working. For instance, one of the first things she tried to do after landing on the beach was get into the overgrown ruins. Upon meeting Shadowheart at the locked door, it was mentioned to her that there may be another way in at the top of the hill, so my wife did what seemed to be the most logical thing to do.
This is not going the way I wanted it to look. I wanted to look really cool in front of her, but
You try to climb.
instead of I just looks stupid.
She hoped it would be like Breath of the Wild and just let her climb up, but obviously that's not how Baldur's Gate 3 works. Climbing is only possible on very specific surfaces, which is pretty common in games, but to be honest, even I'm surprised that there isn't a climb ability tied to a skill check or the rope, as it is such a common action in D&D. Determined to still get to the top, she found some rocks she could jump to and tried to get up that way. But as her character had low strength, her jump range was pretty small. While she definitely could have reached the top had she positioned herself a bit better and had a little more patience, the window of space to land was tiny and easy to miss, so assuming it was impossible, she felt like she hit another dead end. Eventually, she made her way to the top by just walking around and encountered another locked door to get through. After failing a persuasion check, she tried a bunch of different things to progress, like breaking the lock with a dagger, burning the door down with a firebolt, shoving a pile of rocks to open up another path, jumping on a railing to get on top of the ruins, and obviously none of them worked.
Oh, come on.
Part of this was because some of her plans were just outside of what the game could accommodate, but others, like burning the door down, were on the right track. It's just her character wasn't really capable of doing it with her current abilities. However, she couldn't really tell the difference between the two types of failure, as she didn't pick up on the subtle ways the game was trying to communicate that something might work, making her feel limited in terms of how she could overcome obstacles. Eventually, I decided to show her it was possible to do stuff like break down the door by having Lae'zel do it, but that mostly led to her feeling disappointed that her character was ineffectual with this type of stuff. Now, she did appreciate the things her character was good at, which was mostly talking, and she liked that it meant there were solutions to problems beyond just fighting. For instance, after failing to sneak past some goblins, she was able to talk her way out of a situation by intimidating them.
Haha.
Nice.
I'm powerful. I am very powerful.
She ended up doing this a handful of times, and as she didn't want to engage with the combat that much as she didn't really like it, there was always a nice bit of tension whenever these checks came up, as she felt like there was something to lose, and this led to her being really excited whenever she would succeed. One thing that did feel weird to her with a lot of the skill checks though, was that her character never actually talked. This made it so there would be times where she succeeded in a persuasion or intimidation check, but didn't find the scene to be satisfying because it didn't feel like her character was actually doing anything.
I'm so confused. Was I talking for him or?
No, you're talking for you, and
They
you're
don't
kind of in the
show me
conversation
saying
with.
it.
You would prefer it if.
Yeah, that's stupid.
To be honest, this is something I struggled with too when playing Baldur's Gate 3. There are times where the created character doesn't really feel like a part of the world. You do see what they say and think through text, but them never vocalizing it does create a bit of a disconnect. I do get it from a logistical standpoint. Having voice acting for the main character would either require an unreasonable amount of lines, or for them to scale back on the amount of dialogue options there are, neither of which are good solutions. At some point, a game of this scope is going to have to make some sort of concession that won't work for everyone, and having a non-voice acted protagonist is an understandable one, even if it can be a bit jarring at times. Anyway, despite her successes with intimidation, she found talking her way through things to be less effective than she would have liked. This was especially true during the section where she was tasked with finding Halsin. She figured her best bet would be to talk to people to see if they'd have any information, and as every NPC in Baldur's Gate 3 can be talked to, she assumed there'd be a lot of information to gather, but most don't say all that much, and very few had specifics about Halsin. So my wife ran from person to person trying to learn something, and got annoyed that she couldn't just bring up Halsin with anyone she talked to. Now I imagine there are many reasons to not add a dialogue option like this to every NPC interaction, but as my wife's primary focus was finding this druid who might know a cure, it didn't make sense to her that her character could only ask certain people about him. Every other conversation felt like an unnecessary distraction, and it eventually led to her assuming it wasn't worthwhile to talk to anyone, even though that would have led to answers. All of this is to say that while Baldur's Gate 3 does provide a tremendous amount of flexibility with its major mechanics, whether that be in the form of dialogue or abilities, she still ran into the issue of the game not letting her do things that just made sense to her. Another aspect that hampered her enjoyment that I didn't really expect was how grossed out by the game she was. And in fairness, that was a massive oversight by me, as there is a lot in this title that a normal person would rightly be grossed out by.
I can't do that. Oh my god, what the hell?
You said.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god, dude. I don't. This is disgusting. This game's gross.
What about it?
Oh. This is terrible.
Well, then don't do it.
I don't want to.
Then don't do it.
I don't want to do it. Oh my god!
victory over the school.
Please don't put that in the video.
This isn't to say that these examples of violence didn't register as intense to me at all, but I definitely am desensitized to fictional violence in a way my wife is not. Every time something came up, it pulled her out of what was happening and just wasn't something she wanted to engage with. This is far from the first time she's been grossed out by a game, but as this is probably the most amount of hours she's put into something for this series aside from Animal Crossing, and it is very deserving of its M rating, it is easily the most violence and gore she's experienced from a single title. I imagine there are a plethora of reasons that all the grossness in Baldur's Gate 3 bothered her far more than it bothered me, but I have to imagine the biggest factor in that is my exposure to these kinds of elements from years and years of playing video games. It's the sort of thing that is easy for me to compartmentalize, but for her it just felt uncomfortable. Aside from these aspects making her less interested in playing, it also had some gameplay consequences, the biggest of which being that she didn't really loot bodies as she was weirded out by the idea of taking stuff off dead people. This meant that she had way less stuff to work with and missed out on gear that definitely could have helped her and her party. Honestly though, she didn't have a ton of interest in helping her party, as she kind of hated all of them.
We clearly move in different circles.
He's just like a jerk. She just tried to hurt me.
Yeah, but then she didn't.
But she tried.
Half-elf. I suppose the finer details are lost on a creature like you.
She's kind of a bitch.
Personally, I really like all the characters in Baldur's Gate 3. They are fun and interesting and layered, but not all of them are all that lovable right off the bat. And really, Lae'zel, Astarion, and Shadowheart are probably the three who leave the worst first impression. They aren't nice, they don't come off as all that trustworthy, and Lae'zel and Astarion literally consider killing you when you first encounter them. So for her, the idea of traveling with them felt off, as she fundamentally did not align with what any of them were about. I do think it's worth noting that she missed Gale entirely, and by the time she met Will, she pretty much was over the companions. So I do wonder if she had met these two first, whether or not her opinions on them as a whole would be different, as they are far less abrasive. After a while, she expressed wanting to leave the companions behind, as she was tired of controlling them and dealing with their weirdness.
It would have been quicker to kill them.
No, it wouldn't have. What do you mean?
Knowing that it'd be difficult for her to take on the wilderness alone, I figured it was time to see if she'd have more fun playing some form of co-op. So I rolled up my own character and joined her adventure. As I don't have an extra PC, we opted to play split-screen local co-op, which worked decently well, although there were times where it was a bit visually overwhelming, and also we lost out on some functionality like having a minimap during combat. Also, the screen is always split regardless of how close you are to each other. This is a departure from how Larian's last game, Divinity Original Sin 2, did it, and I'm not entirely sure why it's not the same here, as being on one screen creates a much cleaner look. With that said, I think my wife probably benefited from just being able to focus on her part of the screen and not having to deal with transitioning between the two modes. Anyway, given that it would only be the two of us moving forward, I chose to play as a paladin so that I'd be able to tank hits, deal solid damage, and keep us healed as best as possible. But honestly, I wasn't needed that much for a decent chunk of time, as she kept talking her way out of fights. So I mostly just followed her around as she looked for the safest path to the goblin camp.
Oh, is there a different?
Once we got to the camp, she struggled with figuring out where to go next. As I mentioned before, she kept trying to talk to people who might give her information, but almost always ended up having to engage in unrelated activities that she found pointless. I found them to be pretty funny though. My favorite came up when one goblin ordered her to kiss his feet, and after we beat the crap out of his gang, she turned the command around on him. Then, in a moment of morbid curiosity, she decided to show no mercy and finish him off, causing the entire camp to attack us.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I don't know.
I don't know. Fight these guys.
I don't know.
I didn't do this on my playthrough, so I didn't know it would happen, and it obviously makes sense that hitting a defenseless goblin would make other goblins pretty mad, but she thought it might make them respect her out of fear, which I think tracks decently well, even if it wasn't the case here. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, depending on which one of us you ask, we ran into a glitch here where the game wouldn't load both screens, so we really couldn't progress, forcing us to reload a save. When this happened, she asked if we could load from before she decided to kill the goblin, engaging in her first bit of save scumming like a true Baldur's Gate 3 player. From there, she made her way further into the Goblin camp, got a bit more information about Halsin and where he might be, and after a lot of aimless wandering, found him in some cages. To get there, we had to go through a few small fights, leading to us using pretty much all our spells and short rests. What I should have done here was advise her to take a long rest so we could get everything back and be ready for combat. What I did instead though was forget to say anything, so when the combat started, we were in a bad spot. Despite that, we managed to get really far in the fight before I got downed, and by the end it was pretty much just her and a single goblin left on the battlefield. Without any of her most used options being good enough to finish the job, she looked through the rest of her stuff for a Hail Mary and found a smoke powder satchel. Now I'm not exactly sure what happened next, but from what I can tell, she lined things up so that she would be outside of the blast radius, but during the throwing animation, her character stepped into the explosion, instantly killing her.
Are you kidding me? You told me I was in the way. You told me I was fine.
It was pretty close.
It is definitely possible that I'm missing something, but her dying here, while hilarious, was a bummer because she did something cool in a way that seemed like she should be safe, but due to an animation outside of her control, got killed anyway. Our second time through the fight went much better as we took a long rest beforehand, so she actually had spells and abilities to rely on, and she used them pretty effectively. She applied Hex for extra damage, took out a goblin who summoned a spider, causing the spider to vanish, and used Sleep on the wargs to get some free hits in. Even though she still didn't really like the combat, without having to think about anything but her own character, she was more willing to engage with her full kit instead of just finding the simplest answer, which was great to see. After finally finding Halsin and being told that he couldn't actually do anything about the whole getting cured thing but might have another lead, she reluctantly agreed to help him take out the leaders of the goblin army. Knowing that this task would be above what the two of us were capable of, we decided to invite two of our friends to get a full party going. One joined in as a powerful and quiet storm cleric with tremendous and devastating control over thunder and lightning, and the other played a gnome bard with a drum proficiency named Mark Wahlberg. Sorry, Wahlberg. So that's the energy we were working with. One unexpected element of this fight was that my wife had to control Halsin's actions.
Am I in charge of this fucking bear? I am in charge of the bear.
We assumed he'd be controlled by the computer in the same way he was in the fight before, especially because he has a whole spiel about how he can only be in bear form and won't be of much use aside from attacking goblins, which made it seem like we'd have to keep up with him as he went on a rampage, but obviously that wasn't the case. Regardless, despite not loving having to control him, given that his best option was generally to just attack, it wasn't a huge deal, and as he's so powerful, when he did well, she even took some pride in it.
This bear's pretty good.
This bear's very good.
Thank you.
Now you're claiming the bear.
In general, this string of encounters was the most fun she had with combat in the game. She did feel a little pressure to act fast as to not hold things up for our friends, causing her to be a bit more likely than normal to just go with whatever seemed fastest, but she still usually picked good options. What she enjoyed most about playing with a full group though was just that we got to goof around, both with real life conversations and in-game mechanics.
Wow, you don't even care about when I inspire you? Come on now.
I mean, your song right now is a little weak.
What? Oh my gosh. Good luck fighting the goblins yourself.
I bet you it would be a lot better if he had picked any instrument other than the drum.
So painful.
Nah, you guys listening to solo drum songs the whole battle.
Literally mind-numbing.
You started combat and I'm the only one in view.
The bear's on fire. Uh-oh, bear.
This is horse. No, uh-oh me. I'm fucking half
Don't
dead.
worry, Mark Wahlberg's got a drum beat for you.
Yeah. Oh, this guy's trying to counter my drum beat with a different drum beat. All right, here we go.
It was fun to have the focus be spread across the group instead of every moment and decision being on her shoulders. This more casual feel was a nice change of pace for her. After a few tenuous rounds where I kept dying and the three of them carried me, she ended up getting the final hit in on the last enemy through a great use of Eldritch Blast.
Oh, you got him.
With Halsin and the Grove saved, it seemed like things wouldn't get any better than this, and this would be as good of a spot as any for her adventure to end. Unsurprisingly, Baldur's Gate 3 didn't end up being a game for my wife. Her interests just don't align with the genre, and while it does do a lot of things that make it somewhat approachable for inexperienced players, its depth of mechanics and information was more than she was interested in engaging with. The only way I could see my wife playing more of it is if we were to continue with a full party of our friends. But honestly, that just has more to do with it being fun to play games with friends than anything else, and I bet a fair bit of money that she'd get way more enjoyment playing 4-person co-op with a game that is more her speed. For all of its complexity, Baldur's Gate 3 does a much better job than I would have guessed at making itself approachable. But there is only so much a game of this scope can do in terms of onboarding inexperienced players. There's also only so much it can do in terms of allowing players to do stuff that they want to do. For instance, if she was playing actual D&D as the Dungeon Master, I'd be able to accommodate her ideas, but it's impossible for Baldur's Gate 3 to do that. So yeah, maybe this just means I actually have to have us play D&D now instead of continuing to put it off. Even though she did not enjoy most of her time with Baldur's Gate 3, I'm glad she at least was able to get a small taste of what makes Dungeons & Dragons and games like it so much fun. Being able to have stupid little adventures with your friends.
What a beautiful serene lookout. Nothing could ruin it.
Speaking of ruining nice things, something else that often gets ruined because of bad actors is the internet. As useful and fun as it is, there are also a lot of risks that come with using it, and they aren't always obvious. Links that look legitimate could be from a scammer trying to steal your account, or public Wi-Fis that appear to be from a cafe may actually be a trap meant to intercept your traffic, and all this makes being safe out there feel pretty daunting. But you can stay secure simply thanks to this video's sponsor, NordVPN. A VPN on its own is useful because it allows you to encrypt your traffic, keep your internet provider from throttling your connection, and access sites from various regions around the world to be able to watch stuff that isn't available where you are. But NordVPN specifically goes beyond that and includes services to keep you and your information protected. With its threat protection service, you can block intrusive ads and trackers and get warnings about phishing links or if your passwords have been leaked. For the threat protection, you just have to turn the option on, and to benefit from the VPN, you just click a spot on the map of where you want to connect to. So to get some more privacy and protection, go to nordvpn.com/RasputinVPN, which by the way is also in the description, and sign up to get an extra 4 months for free. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can always test it out for yourself to see the ways it can help your daily internet browsing. All in all, NordVPN offers a bunch of utility beyond just masking your IP address, so to make the internet a bit safer for you, check them out. Thanks again to NordVPN for sponsoring this video. For all of you still here, hey, thanks to my patrons for making this channel possible, and I'd like to give a special shout out to Victor Duva for being an honorary Bag Butin. That's all. I hope you have a great day and or night, and I'll see you in the next one.
And you also have
That's disgusting.
What's wrong?
That's disgusting.
What about it?
What are you talking about? That's disgusting.
What about it?
Everything.